May I perform in exchange for a meal? The timid voice of the 12-year-old girl resonated throughout the foyer of the Continental Hotel, piercing through the sophisticated discussions like a razor. Conversations halted as people turned to observe the young African-American girl who had dared to disrupt the city's most elite charitable cocktail gathering. Amelia Washington positioned herself at the doorway to the grand ballroom, her wide, expectant eyes focused on the Steinway concert piano shining under the crystal light fixtures. Her plain, somewhat oversized clothing stood in sharp contrast to the haute couture gowns and custom-fitted tuxedos surrounding her. She held a weathered school bag against her torso as though it served as armor. "How did that child gain entry?" murmured a woman with platinum blonde hair, gripping her champagne flute firmly. "Where is the security team?" The occasion was a fundraising gala for disadvantaged children, a contradiction that was not lost on Amelia, who had spent the previous week resting in various homeless facilities. She had learned about the gathering when she walked past the hotel's front entrance earlier, and something within her urged her to attempt gaining access. Victoria Sterling, the event coordinator and beneficiary of ancestral wealth, approached with deliberate movements. At 45 years old, she represented the city's high society, educated, cultured, and completely certain of her ethical superiority. "Sweet child," she spoke with a patronizing grin. "This is not your place. There's a McDonald's restaurant 2 streets away." "I simply wish to perform," Amelia reiterated, her voice acquiring unexpected resolve. "Just a single piece for a serving of food?" Chuckling began to spread throughout the assembly. "She believes she can operate the piano," mocked a gentleman in a dark blue jacket. "She likely cannot even identify middle C." "It's endearing how creative these children can be," remarked another lady, moving her head with artificial sympathy. "They observe a film and believe they can accomplish anything." However, Amelia did not lower her gaze. There was something in her bearing, a quiet pride, a silent assurance that seemed inappropriate for a child in her circumstances, as though she possessed knowledge that everyone else present was completely ignorant of. Dr. Robert Chun, a celebrated pianist and judge in national contests, observed the situation from the rear of the ballroom. He had noticed how the girl's gaze fixed upon the piano with a respect he seldom witnessed, even in experienced pupils. There was acknowledgement there, understanding. "Victoria," Dr. Chin approached. "Perhaps we should allow her to perform. After all, we are present to assist gifted young individuals, correct?" Victoria laughed, a clear, heartless sound. "Robert, please observe her. Children such as this lack access to musical training. It is inconceivable." What none of them realized was that Amelia had been raised for the initial 8 years of her existence in a household where music was as vital as oxygen. Her grandmother, a classical pianist who never received the acknowledgement she merited due to her skin color, had been her primary and sole instructor. When her grandmother passed away and Amelia entered the foster care network, she carried with her not only the anguish of bereavement, but ability that even she did not completely comprehend. While everyone regarded her with contempt, Amelia remained steadfast, like someone who had endured far worse tempests and discovered how to find power in her own fragility. Her digits moved unconsciously, as though performing an invisible composition, a practice she had cultivated to soothe herself during the most challenging periods. If you are appreciating this narrative of triumph over hardship and fairness, remember to follow the channel to discover how a simple, innocent inquiry was about to quiet a room filled with bias and unveil a gift that would transform everything those individuals believed they understood about human capability. Victoria Sterling folded her arms and laughed dramatically as though she had heard the most ridiculous jest ever. "Very well, dear," she declared, her voice overflowing with condescension. "Since you persist so strongly, let's establish a small agreement. You may perform, but under certain terms." The audience moved nearer, detecting the scent of a harsh exhibition about to commence. Victoria enjoyed being the focal point, particularly when she could exhibit her moral supremacy before other members of elite society. "First condition," Victoria proclaimed, lifting a perfectly groomed finger, "you shall perform only one piece, and we shall select which one. Second condition, if she succeeds in playing adequately, I shall personally fund a complete meal." However, she stopped theatrically. When she fails terribly, as we understand she will, she must depart immediately and never disturb respectable individuals again. How merciless, whispered an elderly lady at the rear of the gathering. But her voice was overwhelmed by the approving chuckles of the other attendees. Amelia remained still, her eyes concentrated on the piano. Something was occurring in her consciousness, recollections blending with the present moment. She could almost perceive her grandmother Betty's gentle voice. When individuals attempt to diminish you, allow the music to represent you, my child. Music does not deceive, and it recognizes no discrimination. I agree, Amelia stated simply, her voice clear and resolute. Dr. Chun observed, captivated. There was something regarding the girl's stance, the manner she gazed at the instrument, that intrigued him profoundly. In 3 decades of assessing pianists, he had cultivated an intuition for identifying genuine talent, and something about this child activated his professional instincts. Excellent, Victoria applauded. Now for the composition, she glanced around, seeking the most challenging and humiliating option available. Her eyes settled on James Morrison, an average pianist who performed in neighborhood establishments. James, darling, what would be an appropriate piece for our young performer? James grinned mischievously. What about Beethoven's Für Elise? Everyone who has ever positioned themselves at a piano at least once attempts to play that composition. If she truly understands anything, she should manage it. The selection generated laughter from the audience. Für Elise was regarded as a novice's piece among non-professionals, but to perform it flawlessly required sophisticated technique and years of training. It was the ideal snare. If Amelia possessed only fundamental knowledge, she would attempt to play and fail catastrophically. If she knew nothing, she would not even be able to begin. Superb selection, Victoria clapped. A composition that any child who has ever received a piano lesson recognizes. There are no justifications for failure. Amelia nodded and proceeded toward the piano. Each movement seemed filled with a quiet resolve that made some individuals at the back of the hall feel inexplicably uneasy. There was something incorrect about that scene. A 12-year-old child should not possess such dignity when facing such humiliation. When she seated herself on the piano stool, adjusting it to the ideal height with precise, familiar motions, Dr. Chun felt a shiver travel down his spine. Those were not the actions of a beginner. Observe that, Victoria sneered to the guests nearest to her. She does not even understand how to sit correctly on the stool. She has probably never encountered a real piano in her existence. But Dr. Chun had noticed precisely the contrary. The adjustment of the stool, the upright posture, the way Amelia's hands suspended over the keys in a perfect classical position. These were details that required years to perfect. Recollections flooded Amelia's mind like a tide. Her grandmother, her mother, Betty Washington, had been among the first black pianists to attempt entering the city's conservatory in the 1960s. Her ability was undeniable, but the doors remained sealed due to the prejudice of that era. Betty channeled her enthusiasm by instructing children from the community in her modest home, transforming her old upright piano into a gateway to the realm of classical music. Music is the universal language, Amelia, Betty would say, as she guided her granddaughter's small fingers across the keys. When you perform from the heart, individuals listen with their spirit, not their vision. Amelia had devoted countless hours at that piano, absorbing not only technique, but the profound musical comprehension that only a genuine master can provide. When Betty died and Amelia was separated from everything she knew, music remained her only consistent companion, performed on imaginary pianos during solitary nights in shelters. We are waiting, Victoria stated, tapping her impatient fingers. Or have you surrendered before even attempting? Amelia inhaled deeply and positioned her hands on the keys. The contact was like electricity. After months without playing a real instrument, feeling the keys beneath her fingers was like rediscovering a lost portion of her soul. The initial note resonated through the hall with a crystal clarity that made several people look up in surprise. It was not the hesitant amateur sound they had anticipated. It was a note performed with the confidence of someone who knows every nuance of the instrument intimately. Dr. Chun approached discreetly, his professional curiosity fully awakened. That first note had been performed with flawless technique, precise attack, perfect sustain, controlled timbre. These were details that only years of serious training could produce. Coincidence, Victoria muttered, but her voice had lost some of its previous confidence. Amelia began the main melody of Für Elise, and every note that flowed from her hands was like a small miracle. There was no hesitation, no technical error. The music emerged naturally, as though she and the piano were part of a single organism. But there was something else, an emotional maturity in the interpretation that left Dr. Chun completely astounded. The way she phrased the melodic passages, how she controlled the dynamics, how she allowed the silence between the notes to speak as much as the music itself. It was the work of a mature artist, not an untrained child. The hall had fallen completely silent. The champagne glasses remained motionless in the guests' hands. The conversation ceased. Even the servers stopped moving. Everyone was mesmerized by that small figure at the piano, creating music of unexpected and breathtaking beauty. Victoria felt a growing uneasiness in her stomach. This was not proceeding according to plan. The public humiliation she had orchestrated was transforming into something completely different, something that was totally beyond her control. As Amelia played, lost in the music that flowed through her like a force of nature, a single question echoed in the minds of everyone present. Who was this girl really? And what secrets was her music about to reveal? As Amelia navigated the most complex passages of Für Elise, Dr. Chun felt his heart accelerate. 40 years of evaluating musical talent had sharpened his instincts, and what he was witnessing defied all logic. The girl's technique was not just competent, it was extraordinary. The descending arpeggio passage, which challenged even advanced students, flowed from her fingers like crystal-clear water. Each note had weight and purpose. Each pause breathed with mature musicality. Dr. Chun watched in fascination as she controlled the sustain pedal with the precision of a professional concert pianist. "This is impossible," he whispered to himself, moving even closer to the piano. Victoria, sensing the change in the atmosphere, felt the first alarm bells sound in her mind. The conversations had ceased completely. Even the servers had stopped serving, mesmerized by the music that transformed the hall into an impromptu concert venue. She must have memorized this song from some YouTube video. Victoria said loudly enough for others to hear, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. Kids these days imitate anything from the internet. But her explanation sounded increasingly weak. What Amelia was doing transcended imitation. It was pure interpretation, loaded with an emotional understanding that only came with years of serious study, and more importantly, experience. She had witnessed countless prodigies in her career, from 5-year-olds playing Mozart to teenagers mastering Rachmaninoff. But she had rarely seen such a combination of impeccable technique and musical maturity in someone so young, especially in such unlikely circumstances. Amelia reached the climax of the piece where the main melody returns with renewed force after the virtuosic passages. Her hands danced across the keys with a familiarity that revealed hundreds, perhaps thousands of hours of dedicated practice. It was impossible to fake that level of intimacy with the instrument. Memories flowed through the music like an underground river. Amelia could hear her grandmother Betty's voice echoing through the years. "Music isn't about playing the correct notes, my dear. It's about telling a story that only you can tell." Betty Washington had been more than a teacher. She was a visionary who saw the future through her granddaughter's small fingers. Born in 1940, she grew up at a time when black pianists were systematically excluded from prestigious conservatories and concert halls. Her response was to transform her own home into a musical sanctuary where children from the community discovered that classical music belonged to them as well. "The world will try to tell you that certain things aren't for people like us," Betty would say as she adjusted Amelia's posture on the piano bench. "But music knows no color, knows no poverty, knows no limits. It only knows truth." For 8 blessed years, Amelia absorbed not only technique, but musical philosophy. Betty taught her that each composer had a unique language. Chopin spoke of longing, Beethoven of struggle and triumph, Mozart of crystal and joy. More importantly, she learned that her musical voice was equally valuable. When Betty died suddenly of a heart attack, Amelia didn't just lose her grandmother, she lost her world. The foster care system separated her from music, from the piano, from everything that gave meaning to her existence. For 4 years, she carried melodies only in her mind, playing imaginary keyboards in the cold dormitories of shelters. But now, in this surreal moment at the Continental Hotel, it all returned. Every lesson, every gentle correction, every word of encouragement from Betty flowed through her hands, as if no time had ever passed. Dr. Chun watched in awe as Amelia played the final coda of the piece. The way she controlled the dynamics, starting pianissimo and building to a majestic forte before returning to the delicate whisper of the beginning, revealed a musical understanding that took decades to develop. "Please tell me you're seeing this too," he whispered to his colleague beside him, a piano professor at the local university. "This child, she's not just talented, she is a phenomenon." Victoria Sterling felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her carefully orchestrated strategy to humiliate a vulnerable child was turning into the exact opposite of what she had planned. Instead of confirming her prejudices, Amelia was forcing everyone to question their most basic assumptions about class, race, and merit. "It has to be a trick," Victoria murmured to her closest friends. "No one learns piano like that out of nowhere." She must have had expensive private lessons hidden somewhere, but even as she spoke, Victoria knew her words sounded increasingly desperate. The child before her was demonstrating a level of excellence that money alone could not buy. She was playing with soul, with lived history, with a depth that came from places privilege could never reach. Amelia played the final chords of Für Elise with a delicacy that made several people in the audience hold their breath. When the last echo died in the absolute silence of the hall, she kept her hands suspended over the keys for a moment, as if reluctant to break the magical connection between her and the instrument. Then slowly, she turned on the bench to face the silent crowd. There was no trace left of the shy child who had begged for food. In her place sat a young artist who had just claimed her place in the world through the universal language of music. Dr. Chun was the first to break the silence, his hands coming together in respectful applause that echoed through the hall like distant thunder. Gradually, others joined in until the Continental Hotel vibrated with genuine acclaim. Victoria looked around in growing panic. Her attempt at public humiliation had turned into a celebration of the talent she had tried to deny. Worse still, she could see in the eyes of the other guests a question that haunted her. If they were so wrong about this child, what else were they wrong about? Amelia remained seated calmly, allowing the applause to wash over her like rain after a long drought. But behind her eyes, something was forming. Not arrogance, but a growing understanding of her own power. She had proven her point, but this was only the beginning. Dr. Chun approached the piano, his expression a mixture of admiration and professional curiosity. "Child," he said softly, "may I ask where you studied? Your teacher must be extraordinary." Amelia looked him straight in the eye, and for a moment she allowed all the pain of the last 4 years to show in her eyes. "My grandmother taught me," she replied simply. "She said music was the one thing no one could take away from me." The answer struck Dr. Chun like lightning. A grandmother, not an expensive conservatory. Family love, not purchased privilege. Talent cultivated at home, not at elite institutions. Everything he believed about how musical excellence was created was being challenged by a 12-year-old who had just redefined his expectations of greatness. While the hall still echoed with reluctant admiration, Amelia knew she had crossed a line. She could no longer pretend to be just a lost child begging for food. Her music had revealed too much, promised too much. Now, with all eyes on her and expectation hanging in the air like thick perfume, she had to decide how far she was willing to take that revelation and whether she was ready to show these privileged people what a worthless child could really do when music spoke through her soul with the force of generations of denied dreams. Dr. Chun approached the piano with careful steps, as if approaching something sacred. "Young lady," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to ask you a very important question. What is your full name?" Amelia Washington, she replied, maintaining the same calm she had shown throughout the evening. The name struck Dr. Chun like a bolt of lightning. His eyes widened, and he took a step back. Washington. Betty Washington. Are you Betty Washington's granddaughter? Amelia nodded silently, and Dr. Chun covered his face with his hands. My God, he murmured. Betty Washington was one of the greatest pianists this country has ever produced. She should have played at the best conservatories in the world. But his voice faltered, laden with ancient pain. Victoria watched the exchange with growing unease. Robert, what are you talking about? Who is Betty Washington? Dr. Chin turned to her with an expression that mixed disbelief and disgust. Victoria Betty Washington was a legend in the music community, a virtuoso who was systematically excluded from conservatories and concert halls because of her color. She became one of the most respected private teachers in the country, training dozens of professional musicians. The crowd murmured, some recognizing the name from their own musical experiences. Betty Washington was whispered about in musical circles as a teacher who could transform any dedicated student into an exceptional artist. But that was decades ago, Victoria said, her voice sounding increasingly defensive. And even if that story is true, it doesn't change the fact that she's a homeless person begging for money at a private event. It was then that Amelia rose from the piano bench for the first time that evening. She allowed her true personality to emerge completely. The submissive posture disappeared, replaced by an unshakable dignity that made several people in the room recoil unconsciously. Miss Sterling, Amelia said, her voice clear and firm. You are right about one thing. I shouldn't be here tonight. She paused, letting the silence settle in. I should be at Carnegie Hall in New York, where I have a recital scheduled for next week. A deathly silence fell over the room. Victoria felt the floor move beneath her feet. My name is Amelia Washington, she continued, and I am the youngest classical pianist ever accepted into the Juilliard School's Young Artists program. I am also the current national champion of classical piano for under 15s. She paused again, allowing the information to sink in. The reason I am here tonight is not because I need food or money. Dr. Chun watched, fascinated, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in his mind. The documentary, he murmured. You're making the documentary? Amelia nodded. Exactly. I'm collaborating with PBS on a documentary about prejudice and access to the arts. My producer suggested that I attend charity events for arts education disguised as a young person without resources to document how privileged people really treat those they consider inferior. The revelation fell on the room like a bomb. Victoria felt all the blood drain from her face. You're filming us? Hidden cameras? Amelia confirmed calmly. High-definition audio and video. Everything that happened here tonight has been documented for national broadcast. Victoria looked around desperately, searching for cameras for any sign that this was a cruel prank. That's illegal. You can't film us without consent. Actually, Dr. Chin interjected, his voice laden with dark satisfaction. You signed image releases when you came in. It's written quite clearly on the ticket that this event could be filmed for documentary purposes. He smiled wryly. I'm sure no one read the fine print. The crowd began to stir, people whispering frantically to each other, some already reaching for their phone to check their ticket. The panic was palpable. The first part of the documentary, Amelia continued, ignoring the growing chaos, will focus on how talent and potential are overlooked when they come packaged in appearances that defy privileged expectations. The second part will show how people who claim to be defenders of the arts react when confronted with real art coming from unexpected sources. I simply documented your true personalities when you thought there would be no consequences. Dr. Chun approached Amelia with deep respect. May I ask, what do you intend to do with this recording? The documentary will air nationally next month, Amelia explained. But I've also created a YouTube channel where I post shorter versions of these social experiments. My latest video, filmed at a similar event in Boston, currently has 2.5 million views. especially when it comes from people who pretend to be virtuous while practicing the very prejudices they claim to fight. The crowd watched in horror as Victoria faced the reality of her situation. In a matter of days, her cruelty would be seen by millions of people. Her name would forever be associated with the kind of prejudice and elitism she had so clearly demonstrated. "Mrs. Sterling," Amelia said, addressing the event organizer directly, "you have spent this entire evening telling me that people like me don't deserve to be in places like this, that we have no value, talent, or right to participate in high culture." Her voice gained a strength that silenced the entire hall. "Tomorrow, the whole world will see exactly the kind of person you really are." Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The magnitude of her impending public humiliation was simply too great to process. Dr. Chun looked around the room, seeing the panic on the faces of the other guests. "How many other events have you filmed?" "This is the 12th, Amelia replied. "And it's always the same. People who claim to value art and education, but who immediately judge and dismiss talent based solely on appearances." She turned to face Victoria one last time. "The difference between you and me, Mrs. Sterling, is that when I was actually homeless for a few months after my grandmother's death, I learned that dignity doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think no one is watching." The silence in the hall was deafening. Every person present knew that their words and actions that night would be judged by millions of strangers, and most knew that there was no possible defense for what they had demonstrated. As Amelia discreetly collected a small recording device hidden in her backpack, one question hung in the heavy air of the Continental Hotel. How many other privileged and prejudiced people had discovered too late that the young woman they had despised had the power to reveal their true nature to the whole world? 6 months later, Victoria Sterling watched from the window of her small apartment as the limousine pulled up in front of Carnegie Hall. Amelia Washington, now wearing an elegant concert gown, waved to fans before entering the theater, where she would make her debut as the youngest soloist of the season. The documentary Faces of Discrimination had gone viral, racking up over 15 million views on YouTube alone. Victoria had become the national symbol of elitist hypocrisy, losing not only her position in all charitable organizations, but also the respect of the high society she valued so much. Former charity event organizer exposed as prejudiced in viral documentary, read the headlines in local newspapers for weeks. Her luxury events company lost all its important clients, and she now worked as an assistant at a small law firm, trying to rebuild a reputation that might never fully recover. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun had become Amelia's official mentor, helping her navigate the world of professional classical music. The Continental Hotel, embarrassed by the public exposure, created a scholarship program for underprivileged young musicians, naming Amelia as its official ambassador. "Music knows no color, social class, or zip codes," Amelia said in her first national interview after the incident. "It only knows truth and passion, and when you have both, no barrier can stop you." The impact of the documentary transcended entertainment. Music schools across the country started community outreach programs, conservatories revised their admissions processes, and hundreds of talented young people from underprivileged communities were given opportunities that had previously been denied to them. Victoria, watching Amelia triumph where she herself had tried to humiliate her, finally understood the most painful lesson of her life. Dignity and talent cannot be bought with money, inherited with surnames, and definitely not measured by the color of one's skin or the address where one comes from. Amelia's best revenge was not to destroy Victoria. It was to prove that true greatness transcends prejudice, and that sometimes those we least expect carry the most extraordinary gifts. If this story of overcoming adversity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that show how true excellence always finds its way, regardless of the obstacles that try to block it.